The proof from the Quran that Islam is the only accepted religion is the ayah from Surah Al-Imran, Inna ad-deena 'inda Allahi Islam, which means indeed the only accepted religion to Allah is Islam. And in another ayah of the same surah, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Which means that whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted from him, and in the hereafter he will be among the losers. So we are grateful and thankful to Allah that He has opened our hearts and guided our hearts to Islam, because if it were not for the guidance from Allah, we would not have been guided. وَمَا كُنَّا لِنَهْتَدِيَ لَوْلَا أَنْ هَدَانَا اللَّهُ. And we are also grateful and thankful to Allah that we have the knowledge of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, which is the saved group. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in the hadith, the confirmed hadith, وَإِنَّ أُمَّتِي سَتَفْتَرِقُ إِلَى 73 فِرْقَةً كُلُّهَا فِي النَّارِ إِلَّا وَاحِدَةً وَهِيَ الْجَمَاعَةُ وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ وَهِيَ السَّوَادُ الْأَعْظَمُ وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ مَنْ كَانَ عَلَى مَا أَنَا عَلَيْهِ وَأَصْحَابِهِ. So the Prophet ﷺ, he informed us that those who identify as Muslims, that demographic of people will split up into 73 groups, 73 sects, and all of them will be in hellfire except for one. And so when the companions, they said, and who is that one, O Messenger of Allah? He said in one narration, the congregation. And in another narration, the vast majority. And in another narration, those who have the same creed as me and the companions. Yani those who have the same creed as the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. So those three narrations put together, because they are confirmed. Once a narration is confirmed, then the contents of that narration cannot be ignored, because the religious information that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ was revealed to be implemented, not to be neglected. So we have that information, and we cannot ignore it. We have to acknowledge this narration, we have to acknowledge this narration, we have to acknowledge this narration. So all three narrations put together, they tell us that to identify the saved group, you just look at the numbers. If the majority of those who identify as Muslims, they say one thing, they say, we'll give an example. They say such and such about a case, and then there's a group here or a group there, or a certain percentage, although a smaller percentage, that says something else, then you know that that small group, that minority group, they're misguided in that issue. And they're not from the same group. What's an example? Very easy example. And you can use it all day long. It's a very popular example. The majority of people who say, I am Muslim, who raise their hand and say, I am Muslim, the majority of those people, they believe Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, is the first rightful caliph. That he is legit the first rightful caliph through the Islamic process, without doing injustice to anyone and without infringing on anybody's rights. The majority of people who say, I am Muslim, believe that. There's a few people, and there's a group of people that say that they're Muslim, but they say, no, that's wrong. The first caliph should have been Ali. So we know that they're a minority, so we know that they're not from the same group. So we know that they're not from Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So we're grateful and thankful for those two things. For the blessing of Islam, because without it, in the hereafter, the person who is accountable, and he goes into the hereafter without being Muslim, he goes to hell forever, which is the worst. Na'udhu billah, we seek refuge with Allah. And we are grateful and thankful to Allah that we have the knowledge of Ahlul Sunnah, because that is the only way to be sure that you're following the straight path, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he's the one who received the revelation, and we weren't there to hear the information directly from him. So the information that he taught can only reach us through a chain of people. Mostly men, but there are many female scholars that are part of the chains that they are essential parts of the chain. So not excluding women, but the way that we get our deen, the way that we get the information that we need in order to make sure that we are getting closer to paradise and not further away and not astray, is through those chains, and that all of it comes through Ahlul Sunnah. No person on earth right now, living right now, is able to implement an Islam, is able to properly live their life as a Muslim, is able to follow the Prophet ﷺ except through that chain. They can't do it by going on the internet and reading on their own. They can't do it by getting a so-called translation of the Quran, the so-called clear Quran, which is actually, I've looked at it and I've done comparisons. It's actually unclear. It makes things, and actually it misrepresents some of the ayat, the meanings of some of the ayat, misrepresents. So I do not recommend for anyone to get that or to use that. But the point is, the only way that you can be sure that you're being an obedient slave to Allah is with the knowledge that came from the Prophet ﷺ. And since we weren't there, we need the chains of narration, and we need the knowledge of Ahlul Sunnah, because they are the same group and they're the ones who preserve the knowledge for us until now. So alhamdulillah, since Ramadan is really close, on the 28th of February after sunset, the Muslims all over the world, they will scan the western horizon right after sunset or right at sunset. They're going to be scanning the western horizon, seeing if they can see the crescent moon with the naked eye, without a telescope, without a microscope, without binoculars, without even prescription lenses. So if you wear glasses, you gotta, if you're short-sighted, you look to see, and if you think that it's that over there, you take your glasses off and then try to see it without your glasses, so that the sighting can be fulfilled. We're gonna go over that. But since that's the case, since it's so close, it behooves us as Muslims, in the name of implementing the Islamic principle of doing things properly and anticipating, obeying Allah. We're going over the overview, the breakdown of fasting and what's required, and the integrals and the conditions and the invalidators, inshallah. So we have a special treat, a special thing, a brand new addition to the trustworthy and reliable and accurate and top tier English library of the Islamic knowledge. Before I studied and before I learned Arabic, it was definitely scarce to find reliable books in the English language that covered various topics of Islamic knowledges and sciences. There were some English authoring, but they were limited. Now we're expanding the library. We have the whole entire Quran, tafsir in English. We have, now this is, we're going to read from it because we have it. This is the summarized explanation of the summary. So there's the actual comprehensive explanation of the original text, and so that comprehensive explanation is very, very long, and it's very, the student of knowledge, you would need to have taken a book that is under it in level so that he can get to that level. But so this is the stepping stone. So first is the summary, and then is the text. Then it's the lucid word, which is a brief explanation of its terms, which is they're intertwined together. And then this is the summarized explanation. So it's going to have the text on the top and then the explanation separate from it in its own like paragraphs. So whoever has this book, they can follow along. It's page 189. Whoever wants the book, we have fresh copies available here. Whoever wants, they can consult with our beloved sister, Al-Hajjah Rima. Okay, the sister Rima, and she will hook you up, inshallah. And we have many other books that are coming too, so we plan to do special courses in those. So page 189, the author, may God have mercy on him, said, fasting the month of Ramadan is obligatory upon every accountable Muslim. It is not valid for the woman in the state of menstruation or postpartum bleeding to fast. However, she must make up the days she missed. Explanation. Fasting Ramadan is an obligation because it is one of the 5 greatest matters of Islam, and Ramadan is the best month. So fasting the month of Ramadan is one of those things that are known as the greatest matters of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ, in many confirmed hadith, he gave this information. And when he was asked by Angel Jibreel to tell him about Islam, he said the Shahada, to testify no one is God except Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, to do the 5 daily prayers, to pay zakah, and to fast Ramadan, and to go to the Hajj. These 5 things were mentioned together. So in many different narrations, in many different instances, the Prophet ﷺ, he listed these 5 matters, and in one hadith, he said, Bunya al-Islamu ala khams, which means the 5 most important matters of Islam are these 5. So the month of Ramadan, it is the 9th month. So Ramadan is the name of a lunar month, the name of the 9th lunar month. The lunar calendar has 12 months. The first month of the lunar calendar is Muharram, and the last month of the lunar calendar is Dhul Hijjah. Month number 9 is Ramadan. The month that we're in right now is Sha'ban. And Ramadan is the best month, meaning that Allah Ta'ala, He gave this lunar month that virtue. So Allah Ta'ala, He's the one who designates the status and the virtue of a creation. And so basically, God judged that Ramadan is the best month. That's why it's the best month. And Allah Ta'ala honored the nation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by making their obligatory fasting be during the best month. So it's something that is a virtue for this nation. Then the author said, fasting becomes obligatory by completing 30 days of Sha'ban, meaning since seeing the crescent of Sha'ban, or by the testimony of one upright adil man that he saw the crescent of Ramadan after sunset of the 29th of Sha'ban. So a couple of things to explain here. How do we know that Ramadan has started? So this is in what the author is referring to when he said, fasting becomes obligatory by completing 30 days of Sha'ban. So since the month of Ramadan is the month that was designated for us to fast, the obligatory fasting, so the time when it's an obligation for us to fast is when Ramadan starts. So what's left is, how do we determine when Ramadan starts? So the author said, by completing 30 days of Sha'ban. So right now we're in the month of Sha'ban. So how do we complete 30 days? That just means that the count of the number of days of that month reaches 30. Right now, what day is it in the solar calendar? It's the 21st of February. So the lunar calendar, in this case, and for this time frame, for this year, or for this month, it's one day ahead. Because it was the 14th, that was the 14th of February, which was the 15th of Sha'ban. So right now, we're on it's technically the eve of the 23rd of Sha'ban. So today that passed, this day that passed, and the 22nd was the 22nd of Sha'ban. Once Maghrib comes in, once the sun sets, now the day is over and the night of the coming day begins. So as soon as the sun sets, now we're on the eve of Saturday. So tomorrow, Saturday, is going to be the 23rd day of Sha'ban. So right now it's in the 23rd night of it. So, like we said, on the 20th of February, we're all going to go, or Muslims around the world, they're going to go scan the western horizon at sunset to see if they can see the crescent. So if they don't see the crescent, what happens? They count an extra day, and they go to 30 days. Now if they see the crescent before, and if they see on the day of the 29th after the sunset, they see the crescent. So they know that the next day is the first of the new month. So that's why the author said, or by the testimony of one upright adil man that he saw the crescent of Ramadan after sunset of the 29th of Sha'ban. So the Muslims, we rely on the testimony of a specific type of individual. So he has to be, and he's going to mention it in the book, but he has to be upright, adil, and he has to be trustworthy. So what is meant by upright here is the male, free Muslim who avoids committing enormous sins, does not insist on committing small sins, and adheres to the behavior and the manners of his peers, of his pious peers, or any of his virtuous peers. We'll just add virtuous, because that's what's meant. Usually, always when the scholars of the Islamic law, when they're referring to the peers, and it's understood that they mean by that the virtuous ones, not the riffraff ones, right? Because in every peer group, there's that separation. That there's those that are virtuous and there's those that are not virtuous. So the scholars don't mean, take as an example those that are not virtuous. No, it means those that are virtuous. Like the ones that pray, and the ones that fast, and the ones that cover, and the ones that avoid the haram, not the ones who are negligent about their hereafter and they commit sins out in the open with no shame. That would be bad. So all these things that we mentioned, we said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These 6 characteristics, they are the conditions of being upright. So, and this is specifically for the sighting of the crescent during Ramadan, or for Ramadan. So we have free. He mentions free. First he mentions male. So it has to be a male. It cannot be a female. So if a female, and where does this judgment come into play? When there is an Islamic infrastructure, and there's a Muslim judge, and then somebody comes before that Muslim judge and they testify that they witnessed the crescent of Ramadan, the Muslim judge, he makes it official that the next day is the first of Ramadan, and he orders everyone in that vicinity to fast the next day. So the religious judgment the testimony that judge relied upon to establish this religious judgment that tomorrow is the first of Ramadan is based on this. So if a woman did it, he wouldn't use her testimony to base that judgment or to make that call. He wouldn't use her testimony for that. And it's going to come, he's going to mention more.
What if the man told the woman?
Well, we're talking about the judge, not like among people. But we're going to get to that case. Like if that woman, she saw the crescent and then she came and told you, what do you do then? In that case, if you believe her, you fast. And it's going to come, he's going to mention it. But right now we're talking about just for the testimony. So it has to be a male, it has to be free, so not a slave. It has to be Muslim, so it can't be a kafir. And that Muslim, he has to avoid enormous sins. So if he does even one enormous sin, he's disqualified from having his testimony be relied upon by the Muslim judge. And he does not insist on committing small sins. So what's meant here is the technical definition of persisting in sinning, which is when a Muslim, he does small sin after small sin after small sin without repenting until the number of his small sins exceeds the number of good deeds that he has. So let's say that, and just for the hypothetical, let's say he has 1 million good deeds, but he was persistent on committing a certain type of small sin until his number of small sins became, let's say, 1,000,001. Now, what happens is he gets an enormous sin documented against him. So basically, once his small sins, they surpass his number of good deeds, he has committed an enormous sin by that. So now he has 1,000,001 small sins plus an enormous sin. So that would disqualify him from being upright, adil. And adheres to the behavior and the manners of his peers. This is called al-muru'ah in Arabic. I don't know of a one-worder for it in English. There's no mirror word for it. But it's something along the lines of chivalry, etiquette, but a specific type of etiquette. But the definition is the behavior and manners of his peers, of his virtuous peers. So he's going to mention now an example. He said, so for instance, although not sinful, but such a person does not play chess frequently, fly pigeons around, or occupy his time by telling non-beneficial funny stories and the like. So he just gave an example of things that are considered to be breaching that etiquette of the virtuous peers, breaching what would make that person be considered to be upright because of the, let's say, the first example that they give is playing chess frequently. So the one who plays chess frequently, although it's not sinful, right? It's not sinful to play chess, but the one who plays chess frequently, he wouldn't be considered trustworthy in the testimony, even though he's not sinful. The one who flies pigeons around. I'm sure that if you're from the Middle East, you've seen this. If you're not from the Middle East, then you can look it up on YouTube. But basically, and maybe it happens in other countries, but I'm only seeing it in the Middle East. Basically, there's a person, he's on the roof, and he has like a really long stick, and then he has like a little cloth or something attached to the edge of it, and he swings it around in a circle, and then all the pigeons, they start following this, and then they start circling, like flying around in a circle, and then so what they do with that is other pigeons that are around, they're gonna see that and they're gonna join, and then he somehow brings them back down, and then he puts them in the coop or the cage or whatever, and then he sells them or he keeps them as pets or he eats them. Because you can, if you slaughter a pigeon, you can eat it. I've never had it, but I'm pretty sure it's like chicken. So if someone does that, they fly pigeons around, that's not behavior and manners of his virtuous peers. So he wouldn't be considered upright. He wouldn't be considered trustworthy in the testimony, even though it's not sinful. Same thing for the one who occupies his time by telling non-beneficial funny stories. Non-beneficial funny stories. So non-beneficial means that there's no reward that they get out of it, but it's not sinful. So it's not beneficial, not because it's sinful, because like we said, if it's sinful, and if it falls into the category of an enormous sin, he's automatically disqualified. But non-beneficial could mean it's permissible, but there's no moral of the story, there's no wisdom to be learned, right? There's no reward behind it. You can't get reward for it. So the one who does that, who is constantly telling non-beneficial jokes and stories, he wouldn't be trustworthy. And his testimony would not be accepted by the Muslim judge. Hence, if an upright person who has the aforementioned description testified having seen the crescent of Ramadan by saying, I testify that I saw the crescent of Ramadan this night, then fasting is confirmed for him and for others. And for him and for others, and in that vicinity, according to Shafi'i. We're going to talk about Abu Hanifa, and it's going to come. However, if astronomers say that tomorrow is Ramadan, based on calculations, it is not permissible to fast relying on their saying. This is the ruling per the four madhab, and per the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the four famous schools of Islamic jurisprudence. The scholars agreed that to implement a religious action, to implement an act of worship or an act of obedience, to use calculations to implement that, to base the implementation of that worship on calculations is invalid. So it doesn't only apply to the beginning of Ramadan. This could be for other things, but for Ramadan specifically, because there are people who they claim that they watch the phases of the moon, or they claim that they know a year ahead of time that Ramadan is going to be on such and such a day. When the way that we determine the beginning of Ramadan is by sighting the crescent or by completing 30 days of the lunar month Sha'ban, the month before Ramadan. So you can't do calculations and trigonometry and all these algorithms and equations to say a year in advance, March 5th, they say is going to be Ramadan. That would not be valid. It would not be valid for the Muslim to base his initiation of fasting, to base his act of fasting on that calculation. It has to come through the sanctioned religious process. And the sanctioned process according to the revealed law. Fasting is obligatory upon every accountable Muslim who is able to fast. Hence, it is not obligatory on the original kafir. Let's look at footnote number 1. He says, the kafir, this is an Arabic term, and it's referring to the non-Muslim. So when we say it's not obligatory on the original kafir, it means that he is ordered to embrace Islam first. So the kafir who was accountable when he died, he is punished in the hereafter for not having fasted. So what does this tell us? It tells us that when a non-Muslim is accountable, he would not be able to fast until he becomes Muslim. So the non-Muslim was accountable. He would not be able to fast until he does what makes his act of worship valid, which is to be Muslim. So the non-Muslim, even if he does the same action as the Muslim in fasting, meaning he avoids the invalidators, right? So outwardly, it looks like he's fasting because he's not eating, he's not drinking, he's doing what the Muslim does throughout the fasting day. But because he is lacking being a Muslim, because he is lacking being categorized in Islam, and being a Muslim, his fasting won't be valid. Because it's necessary for someone to have their fast be valid that they be Muslim. So that's what the author meant by it's not obligatory on the original kafir, on the original non-Muslim, meaning it won't be valid for him until he embraces Islam. But if he's accountable, then what happens in the hereafter if he never embraces Islam and he dies without being Muslim, in the hereafter he's going to be punished for not becoming Muslim and fasting, for not becoming Muslim and praying the 5 daily prayers, for not becoming Muslim and not paying the obligatory zakat, for not becoming Muslim and not doing the obligatory hajj, for example. So he's going to be held accountable for all the things that the Muslim would be held accountable for in terms of obligations because he neglected doing what is required for those obligations to be valid, which is to become Muslim. So he has to become Muslim and pray. He has to become Muslim and fast. He has to become Muslim and pay the zakat. But while being in a state of blasphemy, while being a non-Muslim, he can't fast. So we don't invite him or order him to fast while he is a non-Muslim. The disbeliever is not ordered to perform fasting in this worldly life, even though it is obligatory for them and warrants punishment for neglecting it in the hereafter. So, also the insane person, they're not obligated to fast because they're insane. So whoever is insane, they are not accountable. So they don't have to do any obligation. Or the child. So the child is not obligated to fast because he's also not accountable. The child being prepubescent. Except that the guardian of the mumayyiz child is obligated to order the child to fast after the child turns 7 lunar years of age, provided the child can endure fasting. So first, the term mumayyiz is a technical term. It's an Arabic term referring to mental discrimination. So you see a child when they're like 3 years old. You try to have a conversation with them. They don't really respond to what you're saying based on comprehension. They might respond to what you're saying based on parroting or based on just it being their habit. They know this is the answer for this, so they say it. But if you were to ask them questions that require comprehension to respond, they won't be able to. Why? Because they have not reached the mental discrimination. So before the child reaches that age, it's not valid for him to do any of the acts of worship. So if you see like a 2-year-old, when you're praying in the house, they come next to you and they imitate mashallah. So they stand next to you and they go like this, and then they're looking up at you, and then when you go to ruku', they put like their head all the way down to the ground while their feet are standing up straight. So we're not allowed to, let's say, let them, try to do that while we're praying. Our job at that stage is to tell them to observe, tell them to watch us pray, watch how we pray, so that they can see the actions. When they get to the point of being mumayyiz, when they get to the age of mental discrimination, which can start as early as 5 and as early as 4 if the child is very bright and sharp, but usually the average is around 7 lunar years of age. So at this time, at this stage, the child, he is independent. He can eat by himself. He can use the bathroom by himself. If you ask him, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, I want to be a fireman. And he asked him, why do you want to be a fireman? He said, because I want to save people from fire. I want to help people. I want to save lives. So now you're talking to someone that knows what they're saying, someone that understands the question and is responding accordingly. So they're judged as mentally discriminant. When the child is mentally discriminant and they reach 7 lunar years of age, the guardian of the child, which is the mother, the father, the grandfather, the grandmother, they are obligated to order and command the child to fast. With the condition of what? Provided that the child can endure fasting. Let's look at footnote 1. It is an obligation to hit the child for neglecting fasting despite being able to after the child turns 10 lunar years old, as was mentioned regarding the prayer. Also, basically he's giving that detail. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, order your children to pray at 7 and discipline them for leaving it out at 10 years old. And it's so that they can know that this is an important matter. And of course, there is a stigma, especially nowadays, with the current climate of things, or the way that people's perspectives and their mindsets have changed recently to a more sensitive mindset, if you want to say that. There is a stigma when you say hitting or discipline the child. But Islamically, this discipline, it is, and there's conditions, and there's a certain extent that is forbidden to go to. So of course, any child abuse is forbidden in Islam. And even if it's your own child, and even for discipline, it's not permissible to hit the child in the face, for example. It's not permissible to break the child's bones. It's not permissible to cause paralysis to one of their limbs, or to make them lose the function of an organ, or to harm them. It's not permissible to harm the child. So when we say hit, it doesn't mean, for example, to hit them with a whip. You can take a cotton t-shirt, and you can just roll it up, and you can hit them, let's say, on the back of their thighs. It's a disciplinary thing. The point is not to inflict pain or to torture them. No, the point is that they understand and know the severity or the heaviness of leading out the prayer. That is not something to be taken lightly. And also that is conditional, the hitting of the child is conditional to when that disciplining, that hitting, it results in the outcome that you're looking for. So if you hit them and it doesn't have any effect on them, if you discipline them within the Islamic bounds, and it doesn't give you the desired result, then you cannot do disciplining anymore. Because that didn't work, it's not working, so you don't continue down that path. The point of the disciplining is for the child to rectify. So that covers who has to fast. As for the apostate, he has to make up any missed fasting while on apostasy. So the one who was a Muslim, and then he left Islam, let's say, for 5 years, and then he was guided, and he repented, and he came back to Islam. Those fastings that he missed throughout those 5 years, he has to make them up. In the Shafi'i school, he has to make them up. The author said, fasting is not obligatory on those who cannot endure it due to old age or sickness, from which one is not hopeful to be cured. Likewise, the woman in the state of menstruation or postpartum bleeding is not obligated to fast. In fact, it is not valid nor permissible for the woman in the state of menstruation or postpartum bleeding to fast. Let's look at footnote 2. But she is not obligated to eat or drink during the day or do any of the fasting invalidators. So the woman, while she's on her period, she is not able to fast. So would it be valid and it would be permissible for her to abstain with the fasting Muslim abstains from with that intention, with the intention of fasting? It would be sinful for her to do. But if she, let's say, chooses not to eat throughout the day, and she chooses to, let's say, stand in solidarity with the rest of the Muslims that are fasting, but she doesn't have the intention that she's fasting, she's just not eating while everybody else around her is fasting, she can do that. This is okay to do. But it's not counted as fasting without the intention of fasting. So that's the thing that she can't do. She can't abstain from the invalidators of fasting with the intention of fasting while she's on her period. And she's not obligated to drink anything during the day. Or eat or drink anything during the day. However, she must make up the days she missed. So unlike the prayer, when the woman gets her period, she can't pray either. But for the prayer, when she's off of her period, those prayers that she missed during the time that she was on her period, she doesn't have to make them up. And except the first one, when she first got her period, if a certain amount of time passed before she prayed, and then she got her period. So let's say the Dhuhr prayer came in, and then she waited half an hour. She was going to pray in half an hour, but then half an hour passed, and she got her period. So now when she gets off her period, she has to pray that one, because a long time passed before she got her period. That was enough for her to pray. But in between that time and then when she gets off her period, she doesn't have to make it up. So if she bled for, let's say, 8 days, so those 8 days worth of prayer, she doesn't have to make it up. But for the fasting, she has to make it up. Because the fasting, it doesn't happen as often. And it's once a year, 1 month out of the year. Also, the person who is sick with a sickness from which one is hopeful to be cured is obligated to make up the missed fasting. So sometimes the person gets sick during Ramadan. It happens. But it's the type of sickness that eventually goes away. You just need some time and some rest, and you'll be good, and you'll recover. So if that sickness prevented you from fasting while you were sick, then after you get better, or once you get better, then those days that you missed while you were sick, you have to make them up. Obviously, that would be after Ramadan. But there are types of sicknesses that they never go away. Like what? Like diabetes. Like the one that people are born with. There's a type of diabetes that the person is born with it because their liver doesn't produce the insulin that regulates their blood sugar level. So that person, his whole life, he has to check his blood sugar level, like before he eats, and then he eats, and then he checks it again to see, there's a process that they go through. They inject a certain amount of insulin and they counteract what they eat, etc. And they monitor that throughout the day so it doesn't go too high or too low. So if it goes too high, they'll have a seizure and die. If it goes too low, they'll have a seizure and die. So that never goes away. So that type of diabetic, what's he going to do during Ramadan? If he doesn't eat, his blood sugar is going to keep going lower and lower. And then he's going to have a seizure and die. So he has to eat. So he's excused, obviously. He's not sinful. He eats, right? He has to stay alive. But what does he do for those days that he didn't fast? He can't make them up because he can never fast because he's always going to be in that state. And unless through other than the norm and he gets cured, which is possible. But so what does he do? He doesn't make them up. There's something else that he does that will come later. And it's going to be mentioned later in the chapter. The author said, It is an obligation upon the woman who was in the state of menstruation or postpartum bleeding, and upon everyone who did not fast due to an excuse or other. Looks like it's a typo. Okay, to make up the missed days except those who did not fast due to old age or sickness, from which one is not hopeful to be cured, for these are only obligated to pay an expiation for each missed day. So, getting back to the original case, the woman who's on her period, the woman who's postpartum bleeding, they cannot fast. So what do? They have to make it up. And everyone who did not fast due to an excuse, or otherwise, or other than that, I think that's what it means, or other than an excuse. So what's missing is the word, so it's supposed to be otherwise, or otherwise, not or other, or otherwise not. It's page 190. Second paragraph, third line, seventh word. It should be otherwise. It is an obligation upon the woman who was in the state of menstruation or postpartum bleeding, and upon everyone who did not fast due to an excuse or otherwise. And if the person who did not fast due to an excuse, he's not sinful, but he has to make it up. And if that excuse, and it goes away. Like for the woman that's on her period, once she gets out of her period, then she has to make it up. Or otherwise means they did not fast without an excuse. So they were sinful. Like the one who he caved in to his strong desire to eat and drink during Ramadan. So he ate and drank. May Allah protect us from such a thing. So that person, he's sinful, but he also has to make it up. He has to make up that fast. So it should be or otherwise. To make up the missed days except those who did not fast due to old age or sickness, from which one is not hopeful to be cured, for these are only obligated to pay an expiation 50 after each missed day. So he's just repeating that the one who he missed fasting because of an excuse or other than an excuse, but he can eventually fast again, he has to make it up. But the one who can never fast, like the one who didn't fast due to old age, because he's so old, he's 90 years old. And if he fasts, what's going to happen is kidney is going to shut down. Or something's going to happen to him that's going to harm him. So he's excused from not fasting because of his old age. And is that ever going to go away? No, he's going to stay old age. So he's never going to fast. So he doesn't have to make it up. He has to pay an expiation. Or the one who has a sickness that never goes away, he doesn't have to make it up. He has to pay an expiation. Then he said, the author, may God have mercy on him, said, it is permissible for the traveler of a distance which permits shortening the prayer to not fast, even if fasting is not difficult for one. The sick person, pregnant woman, and nursing woman are not obligated to fast if it causes them severe difficulty, but they are obligated to make up these missed days. The explanation. There are reasons that make it permissible for one not to fast the obligatory fasting, such as traveling a long distance, which is the distance that permits shortening the 4-cycle prayer to 2 cycles, which is the distance of marhalatain, even if fasting is not difficult for one, but provided that the traveler pass the residential perimeter before dawn. However, it is better for such a traveler to go through with fasting when it is not difficult. And here now the author is mentioning for the Muslim that is traveling a distance which permits shortening the prayer, that he is allowed to break his fast. And so we're going to talk in detail about what that means. Even if the fasting is not difficult for that person. So if this specific Muslim traveler, if he is like in the first class seat of an airplane, he's, it's like a couch, it's like a bed, he's got his luxuries, he's got his comforts, He's not, like riding a camel in the desert. But if he fits the criteria of this traveling Muslim, he is allowed, while he's traveling, to break his fast. Even if the travel is not difficult. But like he said in the explanation, it is better for such a traveler to go through with fasting when it is not difficult. Now, what does it mean when he said, the traveler of a distance which permits shortening the prayer to not fast? So, Islamically, there's a certain distance that the Muslim, if he goes that distance as a traveler, he can shorten the 4 rak'ah prayers to 2, and he can combine Dhuhr with Asr and Maghrib with Isha. So let's say I take a flight from here to New York. And let's say I plan to stay in New York for 2 days. So while I'm staying in New York, and throughout my travel as I'm flying on the plane, I'm able to, let's say, delay the Maghrib prayer to the Isha time and pray Maghrib and Isha together and pray Isha instead of 4 rak'ahs, 2 rak'ahs. Because I would be a traveling Muslim that is traveling a distance that permits for me to shorten the prayer. This is a facility given to us by Allah Ta'ala, and we're allowed to implement it. So it's a permission, it's a facility. And it's the distance of marhalatayn. We'll see if he mentions the actual mileage. But there's different sayings. One saying is 27 American miles approximately. Another saying is 80 American miles. And he said, provided that the traveler passed the residential perimeter before dawn. So in English, that's the equivalent of saying Mujawazatul-Umran in Arabic. So the English legal terminology, the residential perimeter. The residential perimeter is where that town ends. So it's not based on like city lines or city limits, like when you're driving by and it says welcome to Dania Beach or welcome to North Lauderdale or welcome to Sunrise or Cooper City. It's not like that. It's the cluster of residential buildings. Where does that end? And there's no residential buildings on either side of the road. Once that separation has occurred, then that's called the residential perimeter. So, if on that day that fasting Muslim is traveling, if he exited the residential perimeter before the Fajr of that day, then he is allowed to break his fast for that same day. If, let's say, the Muslim that's fasting during Ramadan, he traveled during Dhuhr, he passed the residential perimeter during Dhuhr time, he can't break his fast that day, but if the next day he's still a traveler, then it counts for him, he can break his fast. That's what the author said. As for the person who initiates his travel after dawn, then it is not permissible for him to break the fast of that day. Another reason is sickness, if it causes one severe difficulty, namely that which permits performing tayammum, such as fear of death, impairment of a body part, or prolongation of one's ailment. In this case, one is permitted not to fast, just like the one who experiences severe difficulty by using water for ablution or ghusl is permitted to perform tayammum because of the severe difficulty. So that means there's a certain situation where you won't be able to use water to make wudu. And what is that situation? That situation is when using the water, it harms you. What does it mean it harms you? It means, like it's mentioned here, it causes you to die. So if you have a condition that if you use water on your body, it'll cause you to die, then you can't use that water. And instead of using that water to make the ablution, you use the dry purification, which is like patting on the soil. And there's a chapter for that in this book. Or if you use the water, it'll impair one of your body parts. Or if you use the water, it'll prolong a sickness or a wound that you have, so you can't use the water. If the same thing happens to the person for fasting, so if he fasts, he dies, or if he fasts, one of his body parts would be impaired, or if he fasts, an ailment that he has, or a condition, or a sickness, or something that he has would be prolonged, then it's counted here that he's excused from fasting. He is not permitted to fast. So, because he's sick. That's what it means, a difficulty. When he said a difficulty, a severe difficulty, that's what it means. That he would either fear death, or he would have the impairment of a body part, or he would prolong his ailment. Also, among the reasons is if the pregnant woman or the nursing woman fears harm for herself or to her baby. However, if the pregnant woman or the nursing woman, even while being sick or traveling, breaks her fast out of fear for the baby only, that is, out of fear of miscarriage of the baby or having insufficient milk, insufficient milk for the baby, then she also needs to pay an expiation fidya, which is a mud for each missed day, besides making up the missed days. So, many different details here. Let's start with the pregnant woman. Let's say the woman's pregnant. It's Ramadan. She fears that if she fasts, she's going to have a miscarriage. So she's allowed to not fast. She can disregard that fear, because most likely she will not have a miscarriage. She can disregard that fear and fast. But if she does truly have that fear, she's allowed to not fast. Yes.
What if she's poor?
Poor?
Poor. You think she has to pay?
Like financially poor?
Yes.
Yeah, she has to pay the expiation 1 mud for each missed day. Besides the day that she has to make it up. She has to make it up, and she has to pay that amount. Are you saying that she can't afford to pay it? I need to double check, but usually in these cases, basically it stays on her until she's able to pay. So like every day. Like if let's say a Muslim, he bought something, but not he didn't buy it and the money is due right away. So let's say he bought something from a Muslim, and the Muslim said, "You can pay me later." So he has a thing. But let's say that Muslim becomes poor, he can't pay. He still owes it. It doesn't go away until his situation is better. Then he has to pay. So from what I recall, that's her case as well. But I will double check. So let's say the woman is nursing, and she fears harm for the baby as well. So she is allowed to not fast. So in the case where the pregnant woman or the nursing woman, that she fears for the baby only, what happens in this case? In this case, on top of her making up what she missed, she has to pay this expiation. Yes?
Can her husband pay it on her behalf?
Yeah, anybody can pay it on her behalf. Yeah, anybody can pay it on her behalf. Do I have any questions so far from anything that we mentioned? And so far, the author discussed how he determined the beginning of Ramadan and who is obligated to fast. Now the author is going to mention the first integral of fasting, and this will be how we conclude, and he will save the rest for tomorrow. The author, may God have mercy upon him, said, "It is an obligation to have the intention at night and to specify what one is fasting in their intention. This must be repeated every day." The explanation: it is an obligation regarding the obligatory fast to have the intention in the heart at night, that is after sunset and before dawn for each day of Ramadan, even if the intention is before eating after sunset. So this is very simple, very easy. For the fasting, just like any act of worship, you have to have an intention. This is an obligation. What is the window frame of time that you have to make this intention? The window frame, the window of time is from sunset to the fajr of the fasting day. So let's say what time of Maghrib can we say? Let's say someone, they wanted to fast tomorrow. Not Ramadan, but just they wanted to fast, let's say a makeup fast. So it's an obligation. So what do? After sunset, anytime after sunset, and anytime before the dawn, before Fajr, they have to have in their heart that they intend to fast tomorrow, that fasting. So if it's a makeup fast, that obligatory makeup fast. For Ramadan, they would have the intention in their heart, I intend to fast tomorrow, the obligatory fasting of Ramadan, for example. That has to happen sometime after Maghrib and sometime before Fajr. And the author said, even if, like let's say you're in Ramadan, as soon as Maghrib is in, you're sure it's in, even before you broke your fast, you intended that tomorrow you're going to fast the day of Ramadan, that counts too. You don't have to break your fast first to make the intention, no.
If the person, he was willing to fast and it was Ramadan, but he forgot to make the intention and it's already past Fajr.
Okay, that's a good question. Because here's the answer. If one forgets the intention before dawn, then one is obligated to refrain from the invalidators of fasting throughout the rest of that day and to make up the fasting of that day. So, the Muslim, he is not punished for forgetting. The Muslim is not punished for forgetting. Keep that as a rule. The Muslim is not punished for forgetting. The Prophet ﷺ, he informed us that his nation has been given the has been given a free pass in three things. In forgetting, in two things. In forgetting and doing something unintentional, like the slip of the tongue.
How many? How many?
What do you want?
3 passes.
2. Yeah, for 2 things. Forgetting and doing things unintentionally. So that means, what does that mean? That means if Lord is in, and you're like, oh, Lord is in, I gotta go pray. And then you got busy, you got occupied, and like the time just went by fast, and you literally completely forgot. And then later on, you'd be like just in the middle of something, and you remember, oh my God, I didn't pray. You're not sinful for that. If during Ramadan you forget that you're fasting and you just instinctively or out of habit, just pop something in your mouth and swallow it real quick. You know, some people, they just they snack a lot. They are constantly putting things in their mouth and eating it, just just for fun, just like a sport. So they did that during Ramadan, forgetting that they're fasting. They don't break their fast. Their fast is not broken because they completely forgot that they're fasting. So that's what it means that they get a free pass on that, and doing things unintentional. But so, if you do forget to make your intention to fast between Maghrib and between Fajr, when you wake up that morning and you realize you forgot, you're going to have to act like you're fasting the whole entire day, and then after Ramadan is over, after the Eid, you have to make it up. And it's sometime before the next Ramadan. Last paragraph, one has to specify what one is fasting in their intention such as fasting a day of Ramadan, or fasting to fulfill a vow, or for expiatory purposes, even if one does not specify the reason for the expiation, kaffara. This intention must be repeated every day one seeks to fast. Hence, it is not sufficient to make an intention at the start of the month of Ramadan for the whole month. This is because each day is a separate act of worship, because between 2 days of fasting there is a period of non-fasting, just as 2 prayers are separated by the closing salah. So, specifically for Ramadan, what does it look like to specify? It means I now intend to fast a day of Ramadan, yani tomorrow. Like let's say, if tomorrow was a day of Ramadan, the person would intend in their heart right now, sometime before the Fajr, I intend to fast the day of Ramadan tomorrow for the sake of Allah. That would be the intention. So the intention is something that you have present in your heart. You don't have to visualize a statement. You don't have to talk to yourself to have the intention. It's something automatic, like lightning. To bring it closer to your mind, when you go to the fridge, or when you want to get a drink out of the fridge, or you want to get the ice cream out of the freezer, before you go do that, do you say to yourself, I am now getting up to go to the fridge to go get ice cream? No, you just do it because that's what you want, so that's what you're going to do. That's the reason why you got up. That's the reason why you open the fridge, so you can make yourself a sandwich. That's the intention. So at night, the day before Ramadan, you have that in your heart. Tomorrow I intend to fast, obligatory fasting of Ramadan. That's a sufficient intention. And it's not enough in the Shafi'i school to have that intention for the whole entire month from the first night. So on the first night of Ramadan, it wouldn't be sufficient in the Shafi'i school to say, I now intend to fast this month of Ramadan, this upcoming month of Ramadan, and then that would cover him for the 30 days. That would not cover him in the Shafi'i school. What's the reasoning? What's his reasoning within the Islamic law? What is it? He says because between the fasting, there's a time of not fasting, and we're eating and drinking and doing other things. So since that separation exists, you have to do the intention for each individual night. No.
Only in the Shafi'i school?
I'm not sure if there's another imam that says the same judgment as Shafi'i, but not all the imams, they said that. Now, there is one imam who says that you're able to make the intention from the first night of Ramadan for the entire month, and that would cover you for the whole month, and that would be Imam Malik. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. So we covered the first integral of fasting. The second integral is to avoid the invalidators, and then each one is listed individually. And we're going to cover those tomorrow, inshallah, continuing on our dawrah, preparing for Ramadan. Are there any questions about anything so far? No.
Not a question, but I know you mentioned the last time in a different lesson about fasting. But if you can say again that religiously might not be able to feed or give someone a drink, but it's the time of fasting. Even if
Okay.
you're not Muslim, if you could just,
Sure. So yes, among the judgments related to the month of Ramadan is that the Muslim, he is not allowed to assist others, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. He's not allowed to assist anyone in committing a sin. And since we said about the non-Muslim that he is accountable for fasting, but he won't be able to do it in a valid way until he becomes Muslim first. But so, even if the non-Muslim, let's say, refuses to be Muslim, etc., he doesn't want to be Muslim, we cannot assist him in eating and drinking. So whatever that looks like in the Muslim's day-to-day, he can't do it. So whether he is a clerk at a place that serves made food that's ready-made, he can't work the register. He can't take the money and give him like the bag of chips or like the the Gatorade or anything like that. You can't do it. It's sinful. Or even if it's other than that, like let's say you're at college or whatever, at work, and your coworker's like, hey, Ahmed, hand me that bottle of water from the fridge. I'm so thirsty right now. And it's the middle of the day of Ramadan. You gotta tell him, actually, Bob, no. If you want to say it like that. You can find your own way to say it. In the corporate world, you can find like funny ways to say it. Or like, lighthearted ways to say it. Send him a gif of what's that villain from Austin Powers with the bald head? Just send him a gif of that saying, how about now? And then that's it. Alhamdulillah. But for sure, and the reason I say it is because you don't have to be apologetic about it. That's what I didn't want. I wanted to give a response that wasn't along the lines of, oh, no, I'm sorry, or no, you're not sorry. You either explain the whole situation, nicely and with wisdom and like in a good way so the person would become inspired, etc. Or you just flat out just say no, but in a way that is not going to make that person think like something's wrong with you. You just do it in a way that they understand that you're not going to do it. No. Any others? Any questions there? طيب هل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه